saw that the United Nations had a Nakba commemoration. I told you it was the only place in America where you had, but unfortunately that went on in other parts of the world. So there were other countries where they did stuff.
Senator was there?
I don't know if there was a Jewish senator at no, Bernie Sanders allowed them to use the Senate, his office. That was what Rashida Tlaib did at the Senate. But as far as the United Nations goes, that was the United Nations attempt at I don't know what you can say. You can say they were trying to make thank you. Thanks, Mary. They were trying to, I don't know, remind people that the United Nations is the most anti-Israel body in the world, besides the Arab League and places that you expect that to happen. But yeah, the United Nations has not been supportive, as we know, over the years of Israel, especially the last 40 or 50 years. But again, there's very little that we can expect from the United Nations because it's a morally bankrupt institution. So any place that's going to allow the, countries like Syria and China and now Russia to lecture people on human rights is not, doesn't have a lot of credibility, to say the least. So
refugees and not involve themselves with any other country. For years
Yeah.
and years and years and years, they want to be refugees.
And so Joyce's point about being refugee status, and to some extent, a large extent, that's been facilitated by the United Nations. So the United Nations is in a, the United Nations has made that a part of their mandate. So it's been an ongoing issue, and United Nations as an institution has been facilitating that. So that's unfortunate. It's I don't know if that's going to get me thrown off of Facebook again, but so I shouldn't have said that. But anyways, we'll see. But no, it says we're on right now, and yeah.
Bret Stephens had a column in the New York Times yesterday about Israel's 75th anniversary. But what's interesting, he writes in the column, in Jerusalem, I visited an absorption center for new immigrants, most of them in their 20s and 30s from Ethiopia, Argentina, France, and Russia.
Yeah.
Israel welcomed nearly 75,000 newcomers in 2022, the equivalent of more than 2.5 million immigrants to the United States, or more than twice America's legal intake.
Yeah.
Nations that attract immigrants tend to succeed.
So Bret Stephens is also making a comment about immigration policy in the United States here, but he's right. I mean, and again, the point is that if people are trying to get into your country, that's generally a good sign, and it's a healthy sign. But I think his point also is that, and Israel's in a weird situation, which is, it's committed to bringing in Jews from around the world. It is a small country, and so his point was percentage-wise, it would be like 2 million people, over 2 million people coming into America in 1 year. But it's also one of those statistics that it's a little disingenuous, because while percentage-wise he's correct, and people make those arguments that if Israel loses 1,000 soldiers, or like they did in the Yom Kippur War, that's the equivalent of losing 500,000 soldiers for us in the United States, and that's why the Yom Kippur War was so devastating, percentage-wise. But it's also one of those statistics where if you just say percentage-wise, this equals that, it's a little hard to, again, I'm not diminishing Israel's losses in the Yom Kippur War, but it's difficult to make the same comparisons that it was as devastating as, for example, the Vietnam War or Korea, or some of the wars that U.S. fought after World War II, which went on for years, and you know, in the end, 100,000 people died, or you know, I just don't know. You can, you know, making those kind of equivalences, I think, is a little dangerous. And Israel, you know, it deserves the support and the recognition of these great things that it's done. But I also tend to think that you can't just say that. It's the same thing where people say, well, you know, America has so many more guns than every other country. Yeah, that's true. And we have different policies, but things don't exactly equate across countries. And so when people look at those statistics for a country with 350 million people, it's a silly game. But I get what his point is. The point is fair, but it's also a little overly dramatic, and it's using statistics a little bit to freak people out. But I'm not diminishing it, and I want people to support Israel, and I want people to recognize Israel there. But it's a little bit of a game.
What struck me, so many things, you know, were amazing to me on our trip, but there were some little things that really stood out. And one of them was when we were leaving, and we were at the airport in Tel Aviv, and we were in line, and the man in front of us, young guy in his 30s, and he had just immigrated to Israel from New York City with his wife and his kids.
Yeah.
And he could not have been happier.
Yeah.
And he was so excited. And, you know, I just thought, wow, this is, you know, it was hard for me to get my head around it, because it's not like you were immigrating
From Russia.
From Russia,
Yeah.
or
Ethiopia.
Or, you know, someplace like that. And he had a successful business in New York. He was starting over, and I'm like, and he wasn't Orthodox. He was pretty much, from what I could tell, fairly secular. And it was just very surprising to me.
Well, that is surprising, because that is not the normal profile. So it is good to hear that. I do think at some point Israel is going to have an influx of secular Jews from America who just want a better standard of living, who don't want to deal with some of the problems that we have now in our country. So I do believe that is going to happen. Right now, the majority of Americans who come to Israel are generally younger and Orthodox, or older and more secular, who are now looking to retire. Some of them have family that are living in Israel. Some of them just want a different standard of living in Israel, and so the older folks tend to be a little less, you know, necessarily religious. It doesn't mean there's not older Orthodox people retiring there. There are, but younger people tend to be a little bit more on the religious end. So that is happening, and there's more and more now young people who are raised in America, who are whose parents were Israeli, who are now going back and who are moving back. That's a newer phenomenon too, that people who have family, who have friends. We had a kid from AEA who is getting married this coming summer, and she was at high school here in Santa Clarita. Her parents were Israeli. She moved back to Israel, and you know, went back in college, served in the army, and that's where she's living. So that's actually a more recent phenomenon, and it's happening more frequently too. One of the things I saw this last week that Israel's doing, which was really great, is they announced they're spending $40 million on Jewish day schools in the United States to help revitalize and help day schools in this country do a better job of reaching out. It sounds like it's going to be more. It's going to be spent more on curricular things, but it would be great one day if there's money flowing back from Israel to the United States, to the Jewish community, to help support things like subsidizing Jewish education, so that Jewish day schools would be cheaper. This might be the tip of the iceberg, where eventually Israel is supporting Jewish institutions in the United States. For 100 years, we've been supporting them. Now the funds are starting to come back. And so this amazing startup nation that is that's doing very well economically right now. If money starts flowing back to support Jewish institutions here in the United States, that is amazing. That's the vision of the prophets. That's what Isaiah talks about when he talks about, people in Israel and Jerusalem being a light to the world, and specifically helping to some extent the Jewish communities outside of Israel. That's amazing. Isaiah doesn't talk so much about the people living outside of Jews living outside the land of Israel, but he talks more about us going back home, but maybe in his day, but 2,500 years ago. But now this understanding that for Jews who live in the diaspora, there might be support from Israel is really, that's amazing. That's the dream coming true to a whole nother level. So it could happen. The investment that your parents and grandparents made in Israel, in buying Israel bonds and supporting Israel and the JNF and everything else, if that money comes back and that support comes back to us, that's amazing. And it's starting to happen. It hasn't happened maybe fully yet, but and Americans still need to buy Israel bonds and support Israel and everything else. It's a two-way street, I think, right now. But the fact that there is money coming back now from Israel, by the way, devotes millions of dollars now towards the Taglit, towards birthright. Israel helps subsidize that now. Yeah. Israel helps subsidize birthright now.
Okay.
They spend millions now every year. I think it's in the 10 million, 50 million range now. The Israel government now invests back in Taglit to bring American and Jews from other countries under 26 now back to go to Israel to visit. So what? Yeah, but Israel bonds are competitive. They're competitive, along the lines of, well, they were more competitive. Some rates have gone up in America. So they are taxable, and they are but they're a great way to support Israel. So so that's starting to happen now, which is great. So this weekend is Jerusalem Day. So as it turns out, that's also on the Hebrew calendar. Of course, it happened on June 7th, 1967, when Israel liberated the old city and was able to get soldiers to the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, again, for the first time in 19 years. Jews were able to stand at the wall again. That day in 1967 corresponds this year to May 19th. So again, it follows the Hebrew calendars. It turns out it also is very close this year to the secular New Year of 75 years. There's an event actually going on, I mentioned in the city today at the Saban Theater on Wilshire, that the government is helping to support. Seems like it's much more of an Israeli, well, I know because the organization that's sponsoring it is primarily for Israelis who live in America. The IAC, the Israel America Council, which primarily again helps Israelis in America support Israel, giving back to Israel, and but not a lot, as I said, not a lot that went on. I didn't see a lot about Israel's birthday this week. Did you? I didn't see a lot. Didn't see a lot about the Nakba day either. But I didn't see much. I didn't see much. And as I also was hoping and predicting last week, there's a ceasefire in effect, and Hamas did not join in on the fun. Though they claim they never did, and they clearly did not want to ride this one. So they sat it out and allowed Israel to bomb their enemy, Islamic Jihad. So that is good news. It's good news for the people that are going to Israel with us in June. It's good news for people living there now, but people are starting to get concerned. And we hope that is the end. Well, it's not the end. We're rational and realistic that it's not the end forever, but at least it's the end for now. We hope that Israel will have a respite after this last couple of weeks of shelling missiles. Anyways, so we are streaming, we are on Facebook, and we are going to have a chance to pick up where we left off in the red heifer, And this is where we left off in verse 9. The first 9 verses of Hukat of chapter 19 were about the red heifer that is sacrificed, is burned up, and the ashes are used with water to purify people if they've come into contact, the priests have come into contact in particular, with something impure. And so this allows them to go back in. Again, as we mentioned, the red heifer, they're trying to breed a red heifer right now. People are working on that genetic project using modern DNA, modern genetics to try to create that red heifer so that we can rebuild the temple and have a priest, the priest be able to be purified. Because, of course, every priest that would come into business right now would be they would be impure by virtue of the fact that they've been living their lives in a state of impurity up until now. I remember when this story was in the, I mentioned this before, this was 1997, the red heifer or not. So it's a coordinated effort between the Orthodox, some Orthodox, and fundamentalist Christians. So, and again, according to Jewish religious tradition, God, in setting out the law to Moses, decreed that men who come in contact with the dead must be purified with the ashes of a red heifer. That requirement, that became a requirement for the ritual purification of those entering the temple in Jerusalem. So you need to have the red heifer. So yeah, I mean, people know about it. It's not a secret. It's something we don't exactly understand why, but people have been talking about it openly, at least for the last 26 years. I mean, New York Times ran a story about it. It was not a secret. And as I said, there's a couple fiction pieces that are about creating that. And we kind of, where we left out here, it says the one who gathers up the ashes of the cow shall also wash those clothes and be impure until evening. This shall be a permanent law for the Israelites and for the strangers who reside among them. Those who touch the corpse of any human being shall be impure for 7 days. They shall purify themselves with the ashes on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and then shall be pure. If they fail to purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th day, they shall not be pure. Why? Well, it doesn't say, but again, there is a feeling that somehow, like, if you saw a development on those days of impurities, if there was some type of illness or some type, I mean, I'm not going to say this is the reason. We don't know. It's a law. As we said, it's a hook. It's a law that defies or that is deprived of a reason, of a rational explanation in the Torah. But the possibility is that, again, somebody who came into contact with someone who was dead needed to essentially be monitored. They needed to be tested.
Mhm.
I remember when we were in England, when we came to England during COVID 2021, we had to be tested on the 3rd or 4th day and then on the 8th day, virtually the same thing. And then after the 8th day, we were allowed to go out. We didn't stay there for 8 days, so we didn't even get to technically really go out. But yeah, we had to get tested, send in our tests to the government, and that was the way we had. And they actually called every day that we were at Tracy's parents' house to make sure we hadn't gone out.
That's how much staff.
Crazy. And there were stories of people who didn't take the call or who had a person come to their home. I'm not kidding. I mean, we were, and her parents were freaked out by it because they didn't want to, they didn't want to wind up on some list or something. So
When I
yeah.
got COVID, I got a phone call from county.
You did? I did.
Okay. So I had it more than once. I got phone calls both times.
I didn't, and I registered for everything. I mean, I had it for a day, but I never got any.
They were asking
Check.
me really like crazy questions, like what is your? I know, I said, wait a minute, do I have to answer these questions? He goes, no, and I'm like, who's asking me these questions?
Wow.
Yeah.
So there you go. Do we have the staff? Do we have the manpower for that?
I hope not.
It's not tourist.
I know, but I'm just saying. So they did it in England, and they did it here. They probably did it. So anyways.
They tested it everybody once a week, whether they had symptoms or not.
Well,
There's no one.
so all of this is probably, again, we don't know, doesn't say, but it's probably, again, to make sure that the people who are coming into contact with the dead are not spreading illness. Don't know that for sure. One can speculate. This is the ritual. When a person dies in a tent, whoever enters the tent and whoever is in the tent shall be impure 7 days. And every open vessel with no lid fastened down shall be impure. So things that are in the room also have to be investigated, right? Have to be seen to be, watched and quarantined. And in the open, anyone who touches a person who was killed or who died naturally, or a human bone or a grave, shall be impure 7 days, which is why you needed to know where graves were in the ancient world, especially in ancient Israel. You had to know where graves were because you couldn't come into contact with a bone or with a grave. So that's why we had to mark our places where people were buried. It didn't always happen. Not every culture did that. We did because, we're impure. Everybody, it doesn't just say the priest, it says anyone was impure if they did this. Some of the ashes from the fire of purgation shall be taken for the impure person, and fresh water shall be added to them in a vessel. Another party who is pure shall take hyssop, dip it into the water, and sprinkle on the tent and all the vessels and people who are there, or on the one who touches the bones of the person who was killed or died naturally, or the grave. The person shall sprinkle it upon that impure person on the 3rd and on the 7th day, thus purifying that person by the 7th day. The one being purified shall then wash those clothes and bathe in the water, and at nightfall shall be pure. Again, it doesn't say what powers the water and the ashes have. It reminds us of the sota with a woman who drank the ashes in the water that would make her be known if she was having an affair. All those kinds of things that use ashes. They believed that this had a powerful effect. The ashes carried with them the powers of purification. Again, it seems counterintuitive that something that was dirty could actually heal you, but soap is oftentimes made of ash. Not now, but used to be. So some of the things that are in soap we wouldn't think would be for cleaning, right? If any person who has become impure fails to undergo purification, that person shall be cut off from the congregation for having defiled Adonai's sanctuary. The water of lustration was not dashed on that person who is impure. That shall be for them a law for all time. Further, the one who sprinkled the waters of lustration shall wash those clothes, and whoever touches the waters of lustration shall be impure until evening. So the waters themselves kind of create a situation of tameh, which again doesn't mean dirtiness necessarily, but that they've rendered you, as we talked about in Tazria Metzora, they've rendered you in a situation where you can convey something to somebody. You are in a situation where you're not contagious or infectious. You have the power of transmitting something. So this is the last part of this. Whatever that impure person touches shall be impure, and the person who touches the impure one shall be impure until evening. And so this little chapter 19, is about the red heifer and is about coming into contact with death. Seems like a weird thing to just stick in the middle of the book of Numbers. It seems like definitely something we would have seen in the last book of the Bible, in Leviticus. It doesn't seem to really make any sense till you read the next chapter. The Israelites arrived in a body at the wilderness of Zin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. So
Hey, what should I do?
it doesn't, but she was at least 120 years old. So we would assume that maybe part of it was that she was getting up there. Now, the rabbis say that the juxtaposition of this death, and more importantly, the death that we're going to read by the end of this chapter, which is the death of her brother and Moses's brother, Aaron, the priest, necessitated this little tangent, this little excursus into death and how to purify when you come into contact with death, because we're about to come into contact with death. And so Miriam dies, and it says that she was died and was buried at Kadesh. Let's take a look real briefly right now at the map. We're going to refer to it a couple times, but let's take a look at the map and take a look at where we are. So, well, we're actually going to look at two maps because it's a little difficult to know for sure. Two maps here. Where we are for sure. Why? Because there's conflicting maps that are given in the Torah. Now, of course, we don't have pictures, but we do have descriptions. And this is based on one of the descriptions. So this map has us coming out of Egypt, right? It has us starting here in Egypt. And you can see question marks because we really don't know where these places are. But as we go down away, remember, this was the way that we would have gone if we were going to go the quick way into the land of Israel, the way of the Philistines. But right away it said that God didn't want us to go that way because we weren't ready. And we read about that in Exodus. So instead we go down to Rephidim. This is where we battle against the Amalekites. And here's Mount Sinai. Right? This is the wilderness of Sinai. So we assume it's right about here. You see Mount Sinai or Horeb. Then we make our way back up here. And this is where we are. Well, we're here all the whole book of Leviticus, but here in Numbers, as we set out, we start to get up here. And this is about where we are when we send in the spies. Okay? This is where we are when we send in the spies. And this is where we are right now in Kadesh. This is where Miriam died.
How many years old?
This is 40 years later. So, yeah, I mean, here's the problem. We're going to read today about this journey around here. There's a different map given in the book of Numbers. Towards the end of the book, we have a journey where it actually tells us we went from this place to this place to this place to this place. It's in the portion called Maaseh, which literally means the journey, the stops. This map is trying to put together two of them. This map is a little bit clearer, and as you can see, it has us kind of like coming up and back down to here. Look, it's possible that, I mean, this map's a little bit clearer. The point that both maps are in agreement with, and kind of like both versions are, that we were at Mount Sinai down here, and then we made our way up to here. Where we were for the next 40 years is somewhat up for debate. This area is where we are right now before we come in. Today, we're going to read about our journey from here all the way up to here. And why is this important? Because we're going to read about this place right about now, and we're going to read about this right about now too, which is this area around here. So everybody has us not coming in through here. Why? Not stepping foot here? Because you're going to read about it in this next chapter. It seems like we were here for a little bit during this time, towards the end of the 40 years, we were here. So being in this area seems to be kind of consistent. Coming around this way to go in also seems to be consistent. But as far as where exactly we were along that way, there's some questions. And again, most of the maps try to rectify both versions, both accounts. It's more likely that one account has us going one direction and one going a slightly different direction. And it's not that there's a huge difference with it, but the reason that you'll see, for example, right here on this map, which I like this map a little bit better. It's probably a little bit more realistic or whatever. I mean, it makes more sense. Has Mount Hor being here. This map has Mount Hor being here on the Jordanian side. Mount Hor being here makes sense because it's in this region of a dome. The problem is that, and by the way, the Muslims believe that he's buried there. When we went to Jordan and we were at Petra, we were right about here. And then we were at Wadi Rum, we were about here. So we're in this area where Muslims believe that Aaron is buried. There's actually a place called the Tomb of Aaron. We don't know that he was buried there, but they believe he was buried there. But it is also possible that they're here, that it's on this side, and that it's very close to where Miriam is buried, which was said to be Kadesh. We don't know for sure where Mount Hor is. I mean, that's the point. That's why we have two different maps that has Mount Hor in different places. Okay, it's not that far away. I mean, it's 15, 20 miles. It's not like it's that far. And it's in the desert. It's definitely in the wilderness. It's also very close, as you can see, towards the bottom of the Dead Sea. So in any route that we go, at this place, we're here south of the Dead Sea. And that when we cross over here. From the Jordanian side, crossing over here, north of the Dead Sea, near the area of Jericho. So none of it has us coming in through here, which would be the logical place to come in, where we were. When we're in Kadesh right here, the logical sense is we go right here. Just come right up. Doesn't have us going that way. It has us coming here and then going across. And that's what we're going to be reading about in the next several weeks as we finish out Numbers. This is where we're going to be. So right about now, at some point, we're going to either when Aaron dies or right after Aaron dies, we're crossing over into this area, and you'll see why. Why I showed you this map right now, so you can kind of set up for where we're at now. So we're not exactly sure where Aaron died, but we're pretty sure that Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin, we're pretty sure where that is, which is where Miriam died. And the next line it says is the community was without water and they joined against Moses and Aaron. Now, this means that the next generation is joining again against Moses and Aaron. The previous generation, we know, did it all over and over again. Now we're seeing for the first time that these people really are fed up. There's no question that this is the next generation. How do we know? Because Miriam's dead. Aaron's about to die. The 40 years have passed. The only way we really know that, by the way, at this point, is because she's dead. At this point, there is no argument that another chapter, a new generation, another stage of our existence is in going on. And it's very critical that we remember that, because this is another generation that's now doing the same thing that their parents did. But there is a significant difference, and our ancestors, for a long time, including the rabbinical commentary on this, is very interesting, because it is always really consistently more understanding of these people than maybe you or I would be, in the sense that most of us will read this and go, they're doing the same thing their parents did. So let's look. So they're without water and they joined against Moses and Aaron. By the way, this is a pretty key point, which is that this tradition we have, that as long as Miriam lived, do you have a note in your commentary there, John? About Miriam dying and there's no water? or 1 and 2. Miriam dies. Spirit. Well, they're jumping the gun, but yes, we will see that there is a mourning period for Aaron. What else? Doesn't say. And then the next line where it says there's no water. You wait, you don't have it.
Wait.
Come on. It's got to be there. No, then it's not there. That's weird.
20.1.
Uh-huh. Yeah, to the story of the water of the rock. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm surprised it's not there. So you have it, Gloria, in your commentary?
Let's see, the water, 40 years earlier, the Lord had instructed Moses to take the staff he had used to strike the Nile and to strike the rock at.
That's his commentary. We'll get to that in a second. It doesn't say anything about Miriam, though. See if it says anything about Miriam. Well, that's disappointing. Well, I didn't expect it in yours, Gloria. I expected it in John's. Mary doesn't have it. It's not in the King James, right? Your commentary is there's not commentary. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're King James. Yeah, it's King James. Anybody? No. Sheldon, why do they have no more water? What's the midrash? You know? I thought you might know it. The midrash is that Miriam knew where the water was. Miriam had the water. She was the divining rod. She was a human divining rod. Wherever she was, there would be water. Which is why women are associated with water. It's why women. Yeah, I bet you it's maybe not, but it's definitely part of the more feminist readings and feminist midrash today, right? So when we talk about where women are in the and this is an ancient midrash, so it's not like some modern thing we came up with. The ancient midrash is that Miriam, wherever Miriam was, there was water. She had the gift of having water wherever she was. This is her miracle, and that's what it says. And so when she dies, no more water. So this was a crisis. Again, it's why women are associated with water, with a mikveh, everything else. And that tradition we have, the modern equivalent, or the modern midrash, or the modern testament to this, is that we have a tradition of pouring a glass of water at Passover for Miriam, the Kos Miriam. So we have the Elijah cup, and then about 25, 30 years ago, it became traditional in some quarters to have a cup for the women, to have a cup for Miriam, to remind us of the role of women during Passover. So we do that. We had it at our community Seder. We had a Kos Miriam. So Miriam is acknowledged now in the Seder through the cup of Miriam. And to remember that wherever she was, there was water, which was life. If you don't have water in the desert, you die. Which is one of the reasons why the Dead Sea is so insane. Because here you have this huge body of water that is undrinkable. It's unbelievable to see a huge bottle of water.
Life comes through women.
Through water and through women, yeah. And so this was so amazing. And by the way, in the ancient world, the Romans talked about the Dead Sea. They talked about what makes Israel so unique. So when people told in the ancient world, when they had a writer of history would write about, Plutarch, or somebody wrote about the ancient Middle East, they would talk about this sea, this Dead Sea, the great salt sea where nothing lived. It was considered to be like essentially one of the wonders of the world, where people would go to see it and marvel at the sea where there was no living creatures in it. Now there was millions of years ago, there was life in there. It became landlocked after the Jordan Rift Valley was created through tectonic shift. So there was a huge inland sea there, Lake Luzon, it was called by geologists, and it essentially kept shrinking. But as it shrunk, it became more and more salty. The salinity rose, and eventually there had been life there in the prehistoric era, and now it was dead. But the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah are based on that idea that there was probably at one point life all around that area. and maybe even early human life that we've kind of discovered. We've discovered skeletons and remains of people who lived in that area who seem to have had kind of normal lives there. Today, it's a surreal place. You know what George Burns said? He said, Floyd Moose reminded me of this. He said, George Burns was famous for saying that he's been around so long that when he was younger, the Dead Sea was still sick.
And yeah.
Still sick. So,
Daily migration.
the Dead Sea is like a reminder that water is life, and here's this place where nothing can live. By the way, I mean, you can imagine too, the legends of the Dead Sea in this area were real because we've seen it in our own lifetime. The Salton Sea out in the desert used to be a resort. People used to live there. People used to buy homes there. People used to buy, they used to buy summer homes or winter homes, whatever. They used to buy vacation homes. But as it started disappearing, people started getting sick. People started getting sick. People couldn't live there anymore. The air was contaminated. It wasn't just the fact that the boats couldn't go anywhere anymore, that these docks were now sitting in the desert, but people actually got sick from breathing the air. So it's considered an unhealthy place to even just even visit, to breathe out there.
That's why you take a step.
I didn't take you, no, I'm talking about the Salton Sea. I wouldn't take you to the Dead Sea wasn't. The Dead Sea is still, well, it's just a surreal place. And we don't go there for long. I mean, some people do. There's hotels down there, but I think it's something to see, but it's not someplace I want to spend a lot of time at. But it is surreal. There's no other place like it in the world. It's one of the few places you can say, this is the only place like this place. There is no place like that on the world. I think maybe on another planet there might be, but not on this planet. On this planet, there's only one place like that. You don't see it. You don't see the topography and the air and everything there is different than it is anywhere else in the world. So anyways, you could understand why people were amazed at it throughout history. So in the Roman period, there were still boats on the Dead Sea. There were still people at least in that period, still, sailing across it. Not anymore. So there's no water. And it says the people quarreled with Moses, saying, if only we had perished when our brothers perished at the instance of Adonai, saying the same thing that their parents said. But it's interesting here. The translation is correct from the Hebrew. It says our brothers. They weren't their brothers. They were their parents. These are not their colleagues. They were not their siblings. These were not their peers. These were their parents. It was a different generation, right? So it's very interesting that they see themselves that way, that they don't feel like this is another generation. Look, again, it's possible there's another hand at work here, which doesn't see that there's a whole 40 years that passed, right? If you only have one version of the Torah that says that spies were there was a 40-year punishment, this is all happening over the period of a couple of years and not 40 years. By the way, that's part of the reason why we have this weird thing, which is like, how did people stay 40 years in the same area? They must have moved around a lot more during that time, and there must have been stuff happening during those 40 years. We just don't have it. So we're kind of locked in this precarious situation. We're trying to figure out what actually happened during those 40 years. But regardless, it is what it is. And the rabbi said that, look, they compare themselves to their parents in this way, that they're no different. The rabbis 100% believe that this is another generation. And we've taught for a long time that this is another generation. The text itself maybe implies that maybe not a full generation's passed, but regardless. By the way, I will tell you, another thing, which is Moses has to be 120 years old by this point. Okay, so if that means he was 80 years old when he left Egypt. So doing the 40 years forces us to do that. I'm okay with it because at least one version of the Torah says that. But there's another possibility that these people are up there already and they live a normal lifespan and they don't have to necessarily be 120. But if you're there for 40 years, they're 120 at this point. Miriam's even older than 120 because she's older than her siblings. She was a young woman, or maybe not a teen, but a 10-year-old, whatever, when she's watching Moses in the basket. So she's would be way over that. Yeah, John.
We don't know what it almost.
No, and it does say that he lived to be 120. So the Torah does say he lived to be 120 in one place. Mm-hmm.
So, well, we're about to go to 4, but, I find it very interesting that people would rather have gone back to slavery, right?
And they've said it before. And they've said it before. And not only that, regardless, they're really close to getting there now. If this is all happening within the same period of time without a generational shift, they're really getting frustrated and they're really close. If it's another generation, they're just repeating the same mistakes and they're doing the same things that their parents did 40 years later. And I don't know which is worse. Well, I think that one's worse, but I know. And that's what the rabbis say, which is that as much as these people are wrong for complaining and saying they want to give up their freedom, they're dying or they think they're going to die. And so here at this point, the rabbis say that God kind of cuts them some slack, because notice what God doesn't do. I'm just going to kill everybody.
Yeah.
Not here, not yet. God hasn't said that. And actually watch what happens. Watch the way this scene with it goes down. And you've read it before, but let's see what happens. And they say, why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grains or figs or vines or pomegranates? There's not even water to drink. So all the things that they're supposed to have in the land of Israel, they don't have. They're in the desert. That's fair. That's not untrue. Moses and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. The presence of Adonai appeared to them. So again, they're upset. They do what they do when they get upset. They fall on their face, right? They fall on their face and they're humble before God. And now God's going to speak to them. And again, when God was mad before, God would say, I'm going to destroy everybody and I'll start over with you, Moses. God doesn't do that this time. Look what God says. Adonai spoke to Moses saying, you and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus shall you produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. So they have no water. You're going to speak to the rock and the water is going to come out of the rock, which is essentially, again, as the rabbis kind of imagine it, that's what Miriam was able to do all the time. So now they don't have that skill, but now they're going to get that skill. But God gives them that. That's the way the rabbis imagined it. Now, here's what it says. Moses took the rod from before Adonai as he had been commanded. So far, so good. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, listen, you rebels, shall we get water from you out of this rock? Listen, you rebels, shall we get water from you out of this rock? Yeah. And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. Happy ending. They all get water. Well, not so fast. But Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. Thus the waters, these are the waters of Meribah, okay, meaning the Israelites quarreled with God. And again, the word Meribah means to quarrel, whose sanctity was affirmed through them. Yeah, the next verse here says Kadesh. He said, so let's just look at this story. So that's the end of that unit. That's the end of that story. So let's look at that story. Let's just take a moment to breathe this in, because this is a very famous scene in the Bible. This is the scene where Moses is basically now told, you and your brother are not coming into the land. So after 40 years now, again, however you want to look at it, if 40 years had passed, if a couple years had passed, your journey ends here, Moses and Aaron. You're not coming in. Now, most people freak out at this point because they say, are you kidding me? Right, Joyce? Doesn't seem fair.
But it would speak to them.
Right. Okay. So yes, but most people say, but really, God, you're not going to cut this guy slack? He's done everything you've told him to do for the last 40 years. Ever since you met him at the burning bush, he's been following your instructions. He didn't want the job in the first place. He asked you to pick someone else. He never wanted this job. And now you're punishing him. And now he doesn't get to come in over this. Over this. This is the breaking point. Yes. So the issue here is, so what did Moses do that was so bad? What did Moses do that was so bad? So Joyce, what did you say?
He hit the rock
Yeah.
instead of talking to it.
Yes.
And give God the credit.
There. So
Give it.
Joyce hit two of them right there. There's two. Those are two really important ones, right? He hit the rock. He was supposed to speak to it, and he didn't give God credit for it.
Right.
He said, shall we bring the water? Not shall God. So he doesn't give God credit for it. He loses his patience, which he had done before when he threw down the 10 commandments. God never told him to destroy the 10 commandments. So you can make the argument he's gotten away with stuff before of losing his temper. This time, God says no. Anybody see anything else that Moses and Aaron do here that's a
We
problem?
didn't trust him, God,
Because,
because he said we. And
okay, so they didn't trust that takes away some of the trust. That takes away some of the trust. Anybody else? This is an interesting one. This one might be a little bit harder to find, but it is here. Well, it's not there, but it's up here. Right here. Right here. It's in this line, what he says to them. So you already pointed out that shall we get water?
Right.
That's a problem. What else did they say that was a problem? According to the rabbis, at least.
All the rebels.
Yeah. And so the rabbis, thousands of years ago, pointed out something really interesting here. Really interesting, I think, which is that Moses and Aaron had no business calling them rebels at this point. Their parents were rebels, and if we understand that there's a generational shift here, if there's no generational shift here, then Moses is 100% accurate in calling these people that. But we assume that 40 years has passed. And so Moses just did something that God can't tolerate. God, first of all, says, you haven't given them a chance yet. God has not even lost his patience with this generation, at least yet, because he didn't say, I'm going to destroy them. So Moses has made the decision that they're rebels. And so God essentially in the Midrash has a conversation with Moses here at this point, because we really don't hear what Moses' reaction is here. Later on, we read that he's upset that he can't go into the land. And there's Midrash upon Midrash, which we studied a few years ago on Tuesdays. We read pages and pages of Midrash that the rabbis imagined this discussion that Moses has before he dies and says, God, just give me one more chance. Let me go in with the people. Let me go in disguise. Let me go in as an animal. Just let me go in with the people. I don't need to be Moses anymore. Just let me be there for that. And God says, no, you're not going to do it. We don't have the discussion here. We don't have Moses' reaction here. Maybe Moses thought God would change his mind. I don't know. We don't know. I mean, but something happens here. And so the rabbinic understanding here is that the people were not given a chance.
he disrespected God, and he disrespected the people.
Yeah. And so God said, I can call them rebels. You don't have any right to call them rebels. Don't talk about my kids that way. I can talk about my kids that way, but you don't talk about my kids that way.
You just spent 40 years.
I know that's the argument, right? But the problem is that if this other generation isn't going to be held to a different standard, a different expectation, then he's holding them already responsible for what their parents did and not what they did. And then that's the argument. It was that's why the rabbis generally cut this generation some slack by saying they're not as bad as their parents. They don't have that lack of faith that they do. I will say that part of it is this. Well,
What's the evidence?
just that Miriam dies.
That's the.
Yeah. Because if Miriam dies here and
So Moses and Aaron are all.
And Aaron's about to die. So that's where we get it from. Aaron is 3 years older than Moses, and he's dying at the end of this chapter. So that's why we assume that there's time that's passed. Whether it's 40 years or whether it's a couple of months, there's a big difference there. But regardless, and there is a big difference, by the way, if this is a different generation. That's why I say, if we read this, which we have, and the rabbis are always going to read this as there was a generational change here, then it's out of control. Now, one of the interesting things that this generation or this challenge as opposed to the other challenges, these people at least don't say this. They say, "Why did you make us leave Egypt?" Right? There's not even water to drink. It would be better if only we had perished when our brothers perished, meaning the other times you killed people. It'd be better if you killed us then, right?
Right.
So what's different here is they never said, take us back to Egypt.
Wow.
The previous generation, as you saw,
Mhm.
would often say, take us back to Egypt. So John, you kind of said, you jumped the gun a little bit by saying it would be better if we went back to Egypt, because that's what they've normally said. So you're 100% right. Normally, and are we splitting? Yeah. Are we splitting hairs here, or does this generation kind of get it? And as you already said, they don't have water. They have a reason to lose it because they really didn't have water.
They're younger too. They had no memory of it.
Correct. And so they also probably, the idea, though this is the possibility here psychologically, and this is why the Midrash is so wonderful and why our exploration of this is so wonderful, because when we put ourselves into this situation, does somebody who experienced the slavery say, well, I lived through it before, I can live through it again? Whereas somebody like the next generation would say, fuck, my parents lived through that, I'm not living through that. I'm never going to live through that. They did that, I'm not doing that. And so is that a possibility too, where this generation has got their problems? We're going to see it in this chapter. They're going to lose it, and God loses it with them, by the way. I want to point out that this generation is not immune from being punished, but is this generation different in that way? Not in the fact that they're not going to have problems with their faith and with their way of listening to God and everything else, and worshiping, doing bad stuff. But are they different in the sense that they do not ever want to go back to slavery? And does that make
They'd
them?
rather die.
Yeah. So is that a different mentality? As John says, these people would rather die than be slaves. Yeah. So they're not, and by the way, this is a generation, or these people essentially possibly have lived their entire lives in the wilderness. They just want to get home. Yeah.
They've never known slavery.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you've never known it in your life, and someone is going to put you into slavery, that would not. You would just shut that.
Right. Which is why Jews, and we read about it when we talked about it when we were at Masada, why they picked death over being put into slavery. Now, the slaves that were working in the Roman army down below were like, I woke up today and another day of being a slave. They did it. I mean, I'm not saying they should have done it. They didn't know any different. That's just their lives. This is what their lives were now. But yeah, when you go from that point of being free to now having to think about it, some people would just say, yeah, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to live like that. So It's possible. And that's one of the readings that we have here. This is one of the differences between these people. So this is this critical scene. So that's what happens there. Now, they don't say Moses doesn't argue with God there. Aaron doesn't argue with him here. It's not going to be an argument. And now it says, from Kadesh, Moses sent messengers to the king of Edom and said, and we read about or talked about the Edomites yesterday when we looked at on Tuesday's class. We were talking about Edom and the Idumeans and the fact that King Herod was a descendant of these people. Here's why we know that the Edomites are not our buddies. And again, they are descendants of Esau. They are our cousins, if you will. Moses sent a message to the kings of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel. You know all the hardships that have befallen us, that our ancestors went down to Egypt, that we dwelt in Egypt a long time. And the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and our ancestors. We cried to Adonai, who heard our plea, sending a messenger, and look at that note there, it says, or an angel, divine messenger, who freed us from Egypt. Now we are in Kadesh, the town on the border of your territory. Allow us then to cross your territory. We will not pass through the fields or vineyards. We will not drink from water from wells. We will follow the king's highway, turning off neither to the right nor to the left until we've crossed your territory. So we're asking for permission to come into your territory, and we will not be bad guests. We will not mess around. So essentially, we're over here, Kadesh. We're asking to cross over into here. We're going to cross here to this area, and we would just go here. Well, as you can see from this map, we're not going that way. Because,
Cool question.
yeah,
Kadesh,
yeah,
I just don't have it memorized.
Yeah.
I need to cheat.
yeah,
Which
we'll show you.
descendant of Noah is Kadesh?
Oh, no. So this is in, so here's Kadesh right here. It's in this area right here. Or maybe look at this map, which is, again, Kadesh right here. It is the root, same root as Kadesh, Kiddush, holy, means holy. It's probably a place where there were holy sites or a holy shrine. So normally, again, we would have crossed over here and we would have gone here. There's a possibility that we, regardless of whether we went here and then up, which is where we kind of asked for permission, or we went across here and didn't go through there. The reality is we're here and we're asking for permission to go across here. We're asking for permission to go here. Nope. But they're descendants of Esau. They're descendants of Jacob. They're descendants of Abraham. Not only are they descendants of Abraham, they're descendants of Isaac. So they're Isaac's son, Esau, the twin brothers, Jacob and Esau. And he says to them, right? He says to them, you're our brother, your brother Israel, right? Jacob, Israel is your brother. So technically they're like our cousins. They're cousins of the 12 tribes, the Edomites. They're descendants of Edom, and we're descendants of Jacob. So we're asking for permission to come across your territory. But Edom answered him, you shall not pass through us, else we will go out against you with the sword. We will go to war against you. If you cross over into our territory, we will go across. We'll kill you. We will keep to the beaten track, the Israelites said to them, and if we or our cattle drink our water, we'll pay for it. We only ask passage on foot. It is but a small matter. Well, it's a lot of people, but it's just the normal courtesy to ask. And we could say, hey, we're with God. God's with us, but we don't know. But they replied, you shall not pass through. And Edom went out against them in a heavy force, strongly armed. So Edom would not let Israel cross their territory, and Israel turned away from them. So, however they went in, they did not cross through Edomite territory. Why is this important? Why is this story here? To show us that the Edomites did not treat us very nicely. This is somewhat obviously of a pretext for why we don't like them. Because they don't treat us like relatives. They don't treat us as guests or as just with the basic hospitality that you would give to a human being. They came out and threatened to kill us. So as we know, the Edomites and the Israelites had not a good relationship for most of the next 500 years. We do not know who are Edomites today. There's nobody claiming to be the descendants of Edomites. So it's not an issue anymore. They lived in modern day Jordan and Saudi Arabia. They lived in modern day parts of Israel. Part of a dome would sometimes spill over in the desert into our territory too. If you look at this map, Edom was also on this side too. You look at this map, you can see there's no border. Sometimes there's no natural border, right? Because this is below, there's no river here. This is below the Dead Sea.
But
So
they
people
stopped
could go back
using
and
the
forth.
name.
Mhm. So they stopped using the name by the Roman period. By the end of the Roman period, by the Byzantine period, no one's talking about Idumea as a nation, as a people. They get absorbed into the Arabs, to the Nabateans, and then into the Arabs actually. So it's,
They didn't stay refugees forever.
they did not. They did not. The Edomites, by the time of, by the 1700, 1800 years ago, they're no longer a people. And by the time that the Arabs themselves became predominantly Muslim, there's nobody that says, well, we're Edomite Muslims. They're Arab Muslims by that point. They didn't even refer to them by that point as Nabateans. And again, the Nabateans are the people who built Petra. Petra was built by Nabateans who are proto-Arabs. They're not Arabs per se, but they're ancestors of modern day Arabs, the Nabateans. There's nobody that calls themselves Nabatean either. So all of these people live essentially in this area here around the Dead Sea in modern day desert of Israel and the desert of Jordan over here. The King's Road here is the road that connected the Red Sea with all the way up here to Damascus. So this was called the King's Highway. There was the highway of the sea, the Via Maris, the coastal road that connected Israel with the Fertile Crescent. And then there's the King's Road that went up through here. These were the primary connectors in the ancient world between the Fertile Crescent from Egypt up here, or to the Red Sea and up here. So everything would be along this area to keep people from having to go through the desert.
So there was potential for us being lost as a nation
Oh,
during that period of time, big potential.
many times. And especially again, here in the desert, if they had gone to war against us, the fear was they were going to wipe us out. So we went a different way. And so it says, setting out from Kadesh, the Israelites arrived in a body at Mount Hor. At Hor, on the boundary of the land of Edom, Adonai said to Moses and Aaron, so it's not in Edom, it's kind of again in this wilderness area, this borderline area. Let Aaron be gathered to his kin. He is not to enter the land that I have assigned to the Israelite people because you disobeyed my command about the waters of Meribah. Well, we just read it a few verses ago. Take Aaron and his son Eleazar and bring them up to the Mount Hor. And strip Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar, and there Aaron shall be gathered unto the dead, which is the phrase that they use here. Again, another way of saying he will die there. But it says he will be gathered. That's the word. Yeah, asef umet. He will be gathered to be dead. What does the King James say, Mary?
Gathered into
His kin, or gather unto his people. Yeah.
Kind of be a little depressing for Aaron. I mean, basically God saying, you're gonna come up to Mount Hor. I'm gonna strip you of it, everything, and you're gonna die.
Yeah, except for one thing. When Moses dies at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, he's by himself. There's nobody with Moses when he dies. Aaron at least gets to have his son with him, and he gets to know that his son's going to continue on. Listen what it says. Moses did it as Adonai had commanded. They ascended Mount Hor in the sight of the whole community. Moses stripped Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar. So Moses does it, right? So Moses takes the clothes off of his brother and places them on his nephew. And Aaron died there at the summit of the mountain.
But we don't know what's going through Aaron's mind or any.
We don't. Now, Aaron's already lost two sons, Nadav and Abihu, for offering up alien fire and not doing what God said. But he does get to see his son put on the vestment, or knows that his son's going to have the vestments. It says, when Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain, the whole community knew that Aaron had breathed his last, and all the house of Israel bewailed Aaron for 30 days. Now, again, as it pointed out, we did not hear that for Miriam. We did not hear that.
No,
So why for Aaron and not for Miriam? Now, that is a fair question, right? Because Miriam was also a prophet. Miriam was also there at the journey and led the people and seems to have had a miraculous life. So
Bring her water, why didn't they want her?
now there is a tradition that it just doesn't say that. Why? It doesn't go into the same description. And the rabbis actually like to imagine that she had the same kind of death that her brothers did, which is that God essentially took her himself. Now you're wondering, what does that mean? There is a death that the rabbis describe, or the Midrash describes, but I guess becomes part of Jewish understandings of death, where death comes gently. And the way they describe it, the phrase that's used is that God essentially takes their soul as a gentle kiss. That God kisses them. Now, it doesn't quite say that here, but the implication is that, again, their death was that, and we'll read it in Moses's death, was that God did it, and God gave them an honor by not having them die the way most people die. So really, really holy people die like that. There's without getting too weird, supernatural, there's an understanding that other people who were not that righteous, the normal situation that most people get is the angel of death comes and collects them. Right? The angel of death. Now, the angel of death, as you know, in some mythologies and some imaginations, has that scythe, right? To cut the cord, so to speak, right? Cutting the cord. When it cuts it, then you're done, because that's your lifeline. That's where you get that from. The fates, have spun your line, and he comes and cuts it at the end
So
with permission.
Maybe in a way, Aaron's death, he's really being honored.
Correct. Yes. So the rabbis like to imagine that he got honored that way, Moses gets honored that way, and Miriam did too. So their question then, of course, is why didn't it say that? And so the answer that the rabbis gave, which was an interesting one, is that would not be appropriate to say. Again, part of it is that there's this idea that the angel of death has no power over Moses or Aaron or Miriam, in that these people are so holy that even the angel of death was scared to come into contact with them. The angels were even scared of Moses because of how much God loved him and how much contact he had with God.
So God is actually taking Aaron's life
Yes.
directly,
Yes.
not through an intermediary.
Yes.
Wow.
And it doesn't say that. I'm saying it. This is the midrash on it. This is the teaching on it. So the answer of why doesn't it go through this description with Miriam is this. The rabbis say it would be inappropriate. Let me even see if I can show you the Rashi commentary on this. I'm sure Rashi said something about it.
That's not so bad.
No.
But if it's in front of the whole community, you think the author would have had some firsthand account of the death.
Well, there isn't. You're right. There's not usually those kind of descriptions of it. No, it doesn't actually say it in Rashi, but it kind of does. This talks about the angel of death here, but I know it's one of the there's a possible man who stood up against the angel of death that the angel of death would have power. Actually it might be, it might actually have said it earlier. I don't know how they left. You know what? Let me just see if it's when the description of Miriam dying. Hold on one second. Let me just see if I can find it. Because here's an interesting line here, which again is an explanation for oh yeah, here it is. Here's Rashi's commentary. Which again comes from the Talmud. He didn't, and for most things Rashi doesn't invent it. He takes the midrash and he quotes it, right? He doesn't, sometimes he does, but oftentimes he's quoting traditional rabbinic texts, right? She too, as Moses and Aaron, died by a divine kiss. So Rashi's right in the Middle Ages, but he's quoting stuff from 1,000 years before. But why is it not said that she died by the command of God? So when it says that someone died by the command of God, right? So anytime it says when Aaron it dies, it says let Aaron be gathered to his kin, right? It says he gives them those explanations, right? They're gathered, Aaron shall die. That's divine commandment, right? So it says, why doesn't it say that for Miriam? Did you see that note, that what he said? You get it?
Sexist.
Well, it's somewhat sexist, but it's this idea that because this would not be a respectful way of speaking about God, the Most High God, as it would have reference to a woman. It's not so much sexist as it is. Do you understand, Mary, what they're saying? They don't want the idea. They don't want you to imagine
Oh,
God kissing a woman.
okay. Got it.
So it's not.
Maybe sexual rather.
Yes, it's not sexist. You're right. It's more sexual than sexist. Though I guess you could say it's also this idea that God as a man shouldn't be kissing a woman. It's okay for God to kiss another man in a non-sexual way. That's what they said. I mean, I'm just saying. He's quoting. They're giving God. They don't want you to see God kissing a woman. They don't want you to imagine that. I just made you. I understand, but they just made you imagine it. I just made you imagine it because I said it. They said it because they don't want you to have that image of, look, I don't know. Could it be that by the time the rabbis were writing this, they didn't want to have people saying that God is a man having relations with a woman? They're dealing with Christianity, which is teaching what they've been fighting for a long time, which is that God doesn't have a gender. Look, it's not my issue. I don't have any issue with it. They did, and they might have had that issue when they were writing about it in the rabbinic period, and then when Rashi's talking about it, because they don't want you to imagine God kissing a woman. Look, Christians had an issue with it, which is why they didn't want Jesus to have relations with a woman. That's why they don't like the idea that Jesus would have had relations with a woman. It's not just, it's all part of like kind of what people go through in their anthropomorphizing God as a person. It shouldn't be there. You're right. It shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be there for us. And it shouldn't, but when they say, why isn't it there? It's for that reason, so that you won't do that. You won't go along those lines, though you're basically calling into question, well, then what is that image of God kissing Moses and taking away his soul with a kiss? Separating him from life by kissing him on the lips. That's what they're talking about. That's what the divine kiss. I mean, their lips aren't touching, but as the whisper or whatever takes the soul out of the person. What? A kiss of death? I don't know. Maybe. No, I think this idea of God being able to draw out the soul through the mouth is based on the way that it was put into the first person. Because at the very beginning of Genesis chapter 2, it says that God breathed the soul into the human. Yeah, yeah. So only someone who's that holy recreates in reverse or whatever the reversal of what happened to Adam. God doesn't normally do that to somebody unless, I guess, again, you're very, very holy. If you deserved it like Moses or Aaron, then God would take your soul back out. It's all based on this kind of idea too, that when your soul separates from your body, it's a violent separation in most cases, unless again, you're very deserving of having that easy. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to say that, but this idea that people who reached a level of holiness where their soul departed and they weren't, scared, that was something that they observed. I mean, they observed it because they'd seen it enough, and in their mind, fear is associated with something that's not good. If they see somebody shaking and being agitated, they look, oh no, that's not good. They're seeing the angel of death. They see death. Maybe people said that they saw it. I don't know.
Well, that dovetails,
I don't know, go ahead.
that just dovetails in 29.
Yeah.
But is it
Yeah.
really the idea that they're saying the kiss of death?
I think that's more along the lines of what John's saying, which is in the mafia,
Yeah,
kiss of death.
I think
But I don't think this is not that, in the sense that this is the ideal death. This is a death where it's one of people blissfully giving up their soul and not feeling a jarring separation between their soul leaving their body, which again, it's not just Judaism that talks about that. The Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about it as well, that people can actually, if they're holy enough, if they mastered their mind well enough, their body and spirit are able to separate, that someone could project their soul out of their bodies. I don't know.
always thought
Luke
that-
Skywalker did it.
I always thought that scene, Rabbi, I always thought
Yeah.
that scene in The Godfather where Michael kisses Fredo.
Yeah, well, that's what he's talking. That's the
It's almost biblical.
muerta. That's
Interesting, you talk about that, you go to CPR,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, God gave us CPR.
Yep. And that's a breath of life. Uh-huh. Yep. It's a breath of life. Look, I've seen it a lot, but not as much as some. Mary has seen it a lot more than I have. And there are people who seem to die agitated, and there's people who seem to die not agitated. We don't know what it means. I hope the people who've had agitation, it's been more of a physiological issue and not a soul issue. That would be extremely troubling, because, but I don't, Mary, what do you think?
And if they've been people that kind of went like this their whole life.
Yeah. Yep.
Mine's gonna be a tough one.
The angel of death's gonna rip it out, huh? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we look, we still talk about it, and we look, I mean, people, it's always been a part of human existence, right? So when they're writing about it thousands of years ago, it's not really, it hasn't changed. I mean, unfortunately, I don't know that we've made death easier now, but that's when we say giving up the ghost. Someone gives up the ghost, right? Do they give it up, or does it get ripped out from them?
Even in the New Testament,
What?
Jesus gave up the ghost.
Yes. Well, that's a version of, again, a soul leaving a body, how the body leaves, how a soul is separated from the body. And again, is it a violent? In his death, which should have been violent, it appears that it wasn't in the very last moment. But I think that does all come from this idea that if you're really holy, if you're really special, your end doesn't come even again, as talks about Rabbi Akiva being martyred in the Talmud, that in his last moment, when he gives up his soul, as he says the Shema, even though he was violently killed, when he actually has his soul leave his body, he does so at peace. It's considered to be a reward. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like John says, I don't know if I'm gonna want to give up the ghost, or whether it'll be peaceful, or who knows. I don't know.
I'm fighting.
I'm fighting. I know. For Lee, yeah.
Breathe slower and slower.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's considered to be a gift if you are not a. So, anyway, so this scene of Aaron dying is also now followed with some problems. So they come down, everybody knows that they're dead. And I was there. Yeah, it was definitely not a struggle. We're talking about Lee. Joyce just brought that up, and he definitely deserved it and did seem to have had a peaceful passing. He really did. So what happens after Aaron dies? The Canaanite king of Arad, who dwelt in the Negev, which is where they are right now, learned that Israel was coming by the way of Atarim. He engaged Israel in battle and took some of them captive. So this is not Edomite, this is Canaanite. They're living in the land that we're supposed to live in. Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh.
Because I don't think many people understand how important.
Oh, okay. So all the house of Israel bewailed Aaron for 30 days, right?
That's very important.
So let's mention what happens after he dies. Okay, so he dies, he breathes his last, they know he's dead, right? And Israel bewails him for 30 days, the Shloshim period, right? So this is the tradition of having 30 days. Yeah, so they have 7 days, right? Which is what we normally don't leave our houses for 7 days. But for 30 days, the Shloshim period, we're also not supposed to do certain things. We're allowed to leave our house after the 7 days. At the end of the Shiva period, which the Shiva period starts from burial. Shloshim is the 30-day period after, for the 3 weeks beyond Shiva, we are supposed to also not engage in certain things, right? So there's certain activities that we're not supposed to do during Shiva. During Shloshim. So Shloshim literally means 30. That's what it means. So what are some of the things that we don't do during Shloshim? Let me show you. So Shloshim is not observed by a lot of people today, partly because most people don't do a full Shiva.
Is this where the rabbis, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years, whatever, is this where they started the ritual?
Well, interestingly, the basis for these types of rituals of mourning, let me just show you. So this is something that I share with people. So we know that some of the observances of Shiva are done for 30 days after the funeral, a period that includes the week of Shiva. It's not 30 days in addition to Shiva, but it's inclusive of that. During Shloshim, mourners return to work and regular family responsibilities, but tradition maintains a fence that permits grieving to continue. So, again, we don't believe we're supposed to rush back into our lives. So the 30 days essentially creates another barrier, another boundary, another protection for mourners so that they don't have to do things that they would otherwise be obliged to do. We know it's hard for people to take more than a week off of their work. But for 30 days, what are some of the things that we don't do, right? We don't distract ourselves with some of the everyday pleasures we normally do. Traditionally, bereaved, and I say traditionally, it's done by some people and not done by others. Bereaved don't listen to music or attend concerts, plays or movies or sporting events. People don't wear new clothing and men forego haircuts and even shaving. And so when people are not shaving during that period, that's 30 days. You get a beard normally. At some point, you might not get a beard. I didn't shave during Shiva. I did shave after Shiva, mainly because I think I maybe did for a few days. And Tracy said, this is not going for, you're not doing Shloshim. So I was like, I'm not going to argue with you. But again, if I had done it, some people wouldn't have been surprised necessarily, but they would have not known what I was doing. But again, this is an idea that you don't care so much about your looks. You don't go out and get new, you're not wearing new clothes and looking like you're happy, and you're still maintaining this ability to be sad. It doesn't mean that you have to be sad the whole time, but we don't do things that are supposed to make us feel a little lighter, going to concerts, plays, movies, or sporting events, right? So some people, again, will also avoid social gatherings. Although someone observing Shloshim would probably attend a family wedding or bar mitzvah, he or she might leave before the simcha or reception. So they'll go to the ceremony, but they won't stay for the party. If you tried to do that today, many people would say there's something wrong with you, but it is often done. And the problem for some people is that even if it's like a member of their own family, if you're very observant, people will know that you're not going to stay for the party. Say the person's in Shloshim, and so they won't be at the party. They're not expected to be in a more traditional setting, even if it's their own family members. While the notion, again, although there's no Jewish law against it, mourners do not visit the cemetery during the first month. So there is a tradition, you will hear it from people, that they do not go to the cemetery during the first month. It is not a law, but it is a tradition. And it's possible that people didn't do that because of a superstition that the spirit lingered on earth for a period of time after the burial. It also keeps the bereaved in the world of the living. The thought being, again, if they're spending, a lot of time in the cemetery, maybe they're having a hard time moving on.
Rabbi, I thought it was a whole year you don't go to the cemetery.
Some people do it for a whole year, or at least until the unveiling.
Right.
I don't know many people who do that, but you can. I mean, there's people who don't do it. The understanding that the soul, or that the body and soul were not fully separated yet for the first month, there's an understanding that at least after the first month, that's like the longer that the longer that the soul is still hovering around the body, the tougher that person's next existence is. It's not considered to be a good thing. Just remember in the movie Ghost, which was written by Jewish people too, to some extent, when Patrick Swayze's body, his soul was not leaving his area of his wife, it was because she didn't want him to go. She was not letting him go either. So there is this understanding that we can also harm our loved ones by keeping them in the world and not letting them ascend to the next existence. And visiting them in the cemetery would be considered a way of drawing them down rather than allowing them to go up. So there was that understanding. That at least by the time you go there, Mike, by a certain point, right, that by the time you visited the cemetery, their body was no longer lingering by. And again, to some extent, this is based on the idea that you, as kind of a magnet, would be drawing that person's spirit back to their body. So trying to get them separated and trying to allow them to have that separation so that they could go into their next existence. Their soul could be in the next existence. It was not considered to be a good thing that their soul was lingering by their body. So yeah, the hope is that soon that would be done. To some extent, this idea was that if you didn't go for the first 30 days, then you were going to allow that body and soul to separate. Your existence there would not draw the soul there. And so you'd allow that separation to happen. It's all kind of based on, the superstition or this belief of that. But there is an interesting psychological issue, which again is, does recognizing that the person is no longer what was essentially special about that person, their soul, their existence, whatever it is no longer that body anymore, is really important to understand. Because otherwise we get wrapped up in some really warped and dangerous kinds of thoughts, right, Joyce?
Absolutely.
So that's a tough thing for some people to deal with. And so we try to encourage that by having people, at least for a while, not going to the cemetery. And it's also kind of, you know, people seeing the cemetery in the first month or first couple months, to me, it can be upsetting because, you know, the earth is kind of still it's unsettled. You can kind of still see where the grass is kind of coming together. After a few months, you know, things kind of look like they will, you know, they're in a state of what they'll look like, hopefully, for a while. If there's unsettling going on the ground, it sometimes upsets people. And I understand that. I mean, I get that. I would not want people to see that. So I think there is maybe something also of allowing somebody, when they finally go back to the cemetery, to see that spot, for it to have had, whether or not there's a marker there yet, for them to see an area that now has returned to kind of looking like a green field. I don't know. I think that people feel that. So,
Transition.
yeah. And the transition allows people, I think, for them to see. I think it's jarring to see it, I think, too soon. So people ask me sometimes whether they should go. They've heard these traditions about not going to the cemetery, and I always recommend people giving it some time before they go back to the cemetery. But some people do want to go back right away, and you know, it's meaningful for people to be at the cemetery.
And I know when there were two deaths fairly close together, it was very upsetting to go back to the cemetery with the second death in the family. For one of my members of food.
Oh, I can tell you, yeah, I mean, Carrie was buried back next to my mom 2 months later. It was not easy being back at the cemetery 2 months later. And I go there frequently. It's a disturbing, it can be disturbing, and it's you know, it's part of, I mean, I'm there all the time. And you know, sometimes when I'm there, I was there Monday, sometimes I stop by, and sometimes I don't. But I think it's definitely not probably a great idea to linger in a cemetery too long or too many times, or spending too much of your time in the cemetery. Probably not a good sign, right, Joyce?
You're being pulled back to the past and living in the past rather than moving with acceptance into a future.
Yeah, I would generally say if somebody was spending a lot of time in the cemetery, that there's probably some work they need to do on grief, that they're not doing it. They're not doing it at the cemetery. Yeah,
You leave and you don't stop by your mom. You don't hear her.
I wave at her. No, I wave at her. I say, Mom. I said, Mom. So no, look, I mean, part of the weird thing is that if I do go over there, I always say Kaddish, right? So, you know, whether it's, I was there 2 days before, or whether I was there Monday. So, but if I go there, but partly is if I'm in the area, right? If I'm on that side, I always go there. I had a funeral there about 3 weeks ago, and it was literally 100 yards away. I definitely went there then. I couldn't go there and not go up but sometimes I go there, and sometimes I'm in a rush. Sometimes I don't have time, and I don't, you know, I'll just wave. But
We'll be sure, but I don't go to the cemetery. My sister buried.
yeah.
So watch your soap opera. I talk to her.
Okay, well, people find times, right? And they don't have to be at the cemetery to talk to the people that they love, right?
I don't think.
They
I
don't.
think she's there.
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to. Have I brought my mom a pizza? No, I haven't brought her any food. That seems a little pagan. We sometimes joke about, you know, pouring out an offering to her. You know, if we have a little tequila or something, you know, pouring some out to her. But we don't do it. We'll joke about it, but we don't do it. There are people, by the way, who've done that. I've been in cemeteries where they've done that. Listen, I mean, I think the Jewish rituals on this are really smart. I think, and again, that's why, you know, John, I'm glad you had us look at this a little bit. because I do think that it's important to do that. And again, when you come to the end of Shloshim, it says that's not even the end, right? Because you continue throughout the first year to say Kaddish. And again, some people at the end of Shloshim will do something. We just did Rich Tabak just lost his father and didn't get to have a Shiva here because his father was buried back east, but we did a end of Shloshim. So sometimes it allows us to also kind of do another remembrance and to do something that marks the end of that. Look, sometimes, my dad died during COVID lockdown, so we kind of did something at the end of a year because we wanted to have something where we had 10 people at his funeral. So we were hoping we would have something more in public, but then again, they had a lockdown in August of 21, and so we had to cancel that. So we were going to, but it's sometimes because of circumstances, because things get messed up with burials. I mean, I've seen all different kinds of stuff where, took us a while to get the body, or, sometimes people couldn't really have a shiva or a shloshim because by the time they finally had the burial, a month had gone by already. And it's difficult to tell somebody to have a shiva or to have shloshim after they've already been mourning kind of for a month. To do another month on top of it would be hard to justify, but maybe you do something at the end of the month, or maybe do something at the end of the year. Sometimes you have to do things like that. We have to. Correct. Most people do the unveiling at the end of 11 months, between 11 months and a year later. Yes.
There's a new movie out called Love Again. And it's coping with the loss of her fiance. This female character sends a series of romantic texts to his old cell phone number, not realizing it was reassigned.
So Philip, in case you couldn't hear that, Philip just said there's a new a movie about somebody sending messages to their fiance's cell phone, and it goes to somebody else now.
And did
And,
they
and
answer?
I guess there's a love story there or something.
Yeah,
Okay.
because, and he decides he wants to meet her and win her heart, but it's sort of, when you say you want to communicate with someone who's passed away, and you have to go to the gravesite, or I thought about that, what if you send a text or an email, or, I don't know.
No, a lot of people write letters. They've written letters, or they and the equivalent today is, they write something, type something up on the computer. They post things on their person's social media site, because the social media sites now, like a Facebook page becomes kind of a place where people can, you can create it as a legacy page now, and you can post things for the people, and I think what's going to happen eventually is there will be, each one of us will kind of have a searchable version of ourselves, of our lives. And my guess is that when that happens, when all that information aggregates, which is our videos, our home movies, all the stuff that people have, all the data they have on us, that they'll also, there'll be post-mortem tributes on those too. I mean, we're just starting to work on that now, but eventually you'll have that. We'll have, and the post-mortem will continue. People will be able to continue to talk to you or post things about you and honor you, and probably in our world today, make it not good.
Well,
But when people have that opportunity to post,
A few years ago, 60 Minutes did that story about the interviews with Holocaust survivors, but they're being done in such a high-tech way that you can literally ask them questions. And these people are, they even after they're dead,
yes,
the way they created this, and you're gonna see this more with AI, where you can almost interact.
no, it's already done.
It's going
So
to-
yeah, we have a teacher, we have Scott Petrie, his teacher, history teacher at Kennedy High in the Valley. They have a project with their students. These are living survivors, but they essentially, the kids ask questions. The survivor has already recorded the answers to the questions, or virtually any question that you can ask. And then using AI, it kind of figures out what's the proper response to that kid's question. So they'll say something like, did you have any brothers and sisters? And the person will say, they'll answer. It's pretty wild, right? So people will be talking and having these conversations with people. It's pretty weird. And no, it is. It's a good point. And yeah, the Schlossing period is interesting because, again, it is one of the things that I think to some extent differentiates people who are living a more traditional life than a non-traditional life is this understanding that we give people that space in world today. We don't do that. And we don't expect, or we don't even know, we don't even know to do that. Again, to talk about something that we've discussed before, John, there actually was an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where his mother dies and he uses that as an excuse to get out of stuff. So, his mother dies and he says, he says to somebody, oh, somebody asked him to do something. Oh, I'm in mourning, and he clearly was just using it as an excuse to get out of stuff. So it was a typical Larry David moment. But look, I tell people all the time when they wear their ribbon, whether they're going to wear it for a week or whether they wear it for the full month, or whether they tear their clothes, whatever they do, an outward sign, though today, if you wear torn clothes, people think you're just wearing torn clothes, right? It's just a style or whatever. But so maybe a black ribbon now makes more sense. But yeah, people would know and they'd be able to offer you condolences and they'd be able to respect your period of mourning and they'd see it. It's actually, it's really interesting. I will tell you that I remember I was about 15 at high school and we were I was on the track team and there was a kid, we were out on the field one day, it was the beginning of the season, track season, and this guy was wearing a black ribbon on his clothes, on his, he had his, they all were wearing workout stuff, whatever. He had it on his shirt, he had a black ribbon. Now I knew, first of all, I had never met the guy before, but I figured he was Jewish because I don't see people wearing black. I mean, you can, not only Jews wear black ribbons, but this torn black ribbon, I was almost sure he was dead. So I went up to him and I said, who died? I mean, I'd say it like rude like that. I said, I see somebody passed away. And so, and so he said to me, my father. And I remembered, I was like, oh, like, it's not what I expected. I expected him to say his grandparents, great grand, whatever, somebody. So he could see I was really, I was real sorry. That's terrible. And so that dude became one of my best friends, my friend Kerry. And he still tells that story of how he saw my face when he told me that his father had died, that I responded to that. First of all, that I asked him who died, but also that I responded to the fact that he said it was his father and he could see how sad I was that his father had died. And I, thought about it. Turns out he had a very complex relationship with his dad, and I've been friends with him now for 40 years. But that's how we became friends, was me going up to him and saying what had happened. So it does allow people to give you the proper respect and to be comforting to people. And again, sometimes it'll be a stranger, sometimes a stranger will be somebody you end up being friends with for 40 years. So I remember it as vividly as it happened yesterday. And I felt like kicked in the gut to hear that somebody my age had lost their dad. It just really upset me. So, and again, you lost a dad when you were very young. It's just so upsetting to think about that. And then you think about how lucky you are that, you have a family, or your father's alive still. So, it's a weird thing, puts things into perspective, right? I remember because probably at that moment, I was dealing with my parents getting divorced, separating, and they weren't divorced yet, but they were separated. And I was upset about it, but I probably walked away at that moment going, well, at least my dad's still alive. So it kind of makes you think about, right? Makes you think about your blessings and not thinking that, things are so bad. But yeah, I guess that was something that sticks with you. But yeah, and actually that's where we're not going to get into chapter 21, because this next chapter, which deals with a whole nother thing, is kind of the situations that we have where we start to go to war. The next chapters of Numbers, and I'll show you real quick right here as we wrap up. The rest of Numbers, we're chapter 21 right now. You can see this last half of it, or 15 chapters or so. This whole last section is the new generation, 21 through 36. This is the new generation. And from the most part, most of these stories, and there are mostly narratives, by the way, the narratives are coming on right now. Most of these narratives are about us trying to come into the land and dealing with the other nations that are going to make life not easy on us. And we remember it, and to some extent we read about it, and it's there for us so that we don't forget that this journey was not easy. And it was not easy just because we spent 40 years in the wilderness and we were kept out because of our whatever, but the people who are living there didn't make it easy either. And it's not like they welcomed us back with open arms. And again, it makes us think about our own version of Israel over the last 75 years or 100 years since the Jews started returning in numbers back to the land of Israel, that it was not easy. The people there did not make it easy on us. The people that were living there, the people that were living next door, the people who could have cooperated with us did not. They did not make it easy for us, to put it mildly. That's a nice way of saying it. They went to war against us, right? Over and over and over again, until they finally kind of realized that they're not going to defeat us militarily. But that's what we read about over the next of the next section. Next week we won't be in person. We'll be online. I'll actually be in Texas, as I told some of you. I'll be in Texas next Wednesday, taping some really cool Shabbat sounds with Joe Buchanan and Saul Kay and Abby Strauss, some great musicians. I'm really looking forward to it. We're calling it Friday Night Lights, which for people who know Texas and know Friday Night Lights, that's real important for Texas, is Friday night. And for the Jewish people, Friday night's real important. So we're hoping to have a down home Texas sound. It's not in Dallas like the Schulmans are in the Dallas suburbs, but I will be in the Houston suburbs, and God willing, we'll have some good stuff to put out in the coming weeks. So that'll be, but we are going to be on, we'll just be on, well, we'll be on virtually. I'll be on your time next week, Schulmans. I'll be in your neck of the woods. Well, not that close, but closer. I'll be in your time zone.
Right.
Numbers? Oh, Deuteronomy? Interesting. You asked that question. I doubt it. If you look at Numbers is a little bit well, it's a little deceptive because there's 34 chapters, and you saw there's 36 chapters in Numbers. It looks like it's roughly the same, but there are I would guess it's probably going to be about 15 to 16 weeks that we're going to be doing Deuteronomy. So my guess is it's actually probably closer to, by the time we finish Numbers, we'll probably be, because we're gone, we're in Israel for a couple of weeks in June. So we're going to miss a couple there, but we'll probably be wrapping up Deuteronomy around, my guess, around November time. Maybe not December. We haven't discussed it yet. We haven't figured out what Wednesday will be yet, but we'll figure it out. We will figure it out. There's different different possibilities. Obviously, it's going to be different than what we're doing on Tuesdays, but it
What
will be.
about the Talmud?
Well, that's what some people have said, right, Mike, is that we'll look at some parts of the Talmud, which we haven't looked at in a while. We looked at the Midrash, we didn't look at the Talmud, though we looked at Midrash that comes from the Talmud. And for example, the one today about Miriam, that actually comes from Moed Katan, which is from the Talmud. So the Talmud does have Midrash in it, and we have read Midrash.
But
that
what's
comes
great
from
about the Talmud, though, you can just sit there and you can discuss just like the rabbis did.
Correct. And that's one of the interesting things, is that long before we had AI and had these discussions, it made me think about it when Philip brought up the issue of survivors now being able to talk to people even after they've passed this world. The Talmud is definitely those discussions well before we had video and well before we had AI. The discussions that the rabbis have with each other, they're generations apart from each other, and they're debating and they're discussing. They're different parts of the ancient world. They're in different generations, and they're debating and discussing. And we still do that today. We have debates and discussions with these people as if they're sitting with us right now. And that's the amazing thing, is there is no difference to some extent with the way we discuss and do that, as we talked about tonight, which is these people are with us in our discussions. All right, everybody, have a good rest of the week. Hopefully you can be with us on Friday night, if not in person, virtually with Rick and Addie, doing some special songs for Jerusalem and celebrating how lucky we are to have Jerusalem in our generation. Take care, everybody. We'll see ya.
Thank
See
you,
you soon.
Rabbi.
Bye, thank you.
Good night, everybody. Good night.
I'm- we're-